Murders at Karlov Manor takes us back to the world of Ravnica, but this time we aren't focused on the guilds, but instead solving a murder mystery. The set is filled to the brim with fun and powerful cards that are sure to make a splash across a bunch of different formats, so let's talk about the 10 most expensive cards from the set as an indication of the most anticipated cards to be released. Let's get started with number 10. Number 10 is the Pride of Hull Clade, an 11 cost but not really 215 that's a legendary creature crocodile elk turtle, and it costs X less to cast, where X is the total toughness of creatures you control. And it does have defender, so this is very clearly caring about creatures with a lot of toughness and is probably a defender style commander. You can then pay 4 mana, and until end of turn, target creature you control gets +1/+0 and gains whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw cards equal to its toughness, and can attack as though it didn't have defender. So obviously this is a card that cares about having high toughness and kind of gets rid of the downside of defender, and it is a legendary creature, so this is clearly going to be the commander for a lot of people. I don't really think this is good enough to see play outside of commander because it does seem a little slow and a little bit janky, but it seems really good in a deck like Arcades the Strategist, allowing you to play a bunch of walls to cast this for probably just 1 mana, and then being able to draw potentially 15 cards when you hit is incredibly scary for your opponents. This seems like a really fun card that is really aimed at commander, and because of that it's going for $8.99. Next up, number 9 is Leyline of the Guildpact. This is a 4 cost green or white and green or blue and green or black and green or red enchantment, so it's kind of any combination of colors here or all green, and if it's in your opening hand you can begin with it on the battlefield. Then each non-land permanent you control is all colors, and lands you control are every basic land type in addition to their other types. This is a really weird card. All the other Leylines we've ever gotten have been monocolored, and some of them are really good, like Leyline of the Void, and some of them are really bad. This one for me is really hard to evaluate. I think in something like Commander, it's not that great, and in other formats, it actually can be quite good. It just doesn't seem like it does enough to spend 4 mana on it, and you can't really count on it being in your opening hand in a lot of games, but I think in some formats, the ability to make all of your lands become forests so that Nissa Who Shakes the World is extra good on all of them. Obviously, if you're in anything older than Modern, you already have Yavimaya to do that, so this is kind of in an awkward place where it might see some amount of play in Pioneers. It's kind of one of the first effects that can do that for free from the beginning of the game, but it's definitely going to be interesting to see where this sees a home, but clearly people aren't talking about it because it is going for $9.99. Although I do think a part of that is that free spells are often really hard to evaluate without actually playing them, because the condition for casting them for free can be kind of hard to tell how often they'll matter and how often you're going to actually want the spell, so it wouldn't shock me if this one goes down a lot in price. Next up, number 8 is Undergrowth Recon. This is a 3 cost green enchantment that makes it so at the beginning of your upkeep, you can return target land from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. This is a really interesting card to me because it is a 3-drop. Things like Crucible of Worlds and Ramunap Excavator are very good, allowing you to play lands from your graveyard, and this has both upsides and downsides compared to those. First off, this one doesn't use your land drop to do it, so if you have a land in your graveyard, you can resurrect it with this, and then also play a land from your hand. But that also means if you get extra land drops, you can't just like crack Evolving Wilds 3 times using a Ramunap Excavator. You can only do this once per turn, and the land comes into play tapped, which is another downside. On top of that, it has to be there at your upkeep, so I'm really not sure how I feel about it, but I do think this is going to see some amount of play. Landfall decks are a very popular archetype, but this does feel like it might be a little clunky to play. I have to get my hands on it first, obviously, to make that judgment, but it wouldn't shock me if this one dips a little bit in price and then shoots up in price over time as we kind of see people get to use it more and more and more, and we get more landfall commanders. But currently it's going for $9.99. Next up, number 7 is Rakdos, Patron of Chaos. It's a 6 cost black and red 6/6 with flying and trample, and at the beginning of your end step, target opponent may sacrifice 2 non-land non-token permanents. If they don't, you get to draw 2 cards. This one's really interesting to me because it is kind of expensive for a 60 card constructed format. Maybe something in standard, you know, Rakdos has been a pretty powerful combination, and so maybe this is the top end to a Rakdos mid-range style deck, which is going to make you either sacrifice a bunch of permanents or just refill their hand. In Commander, 6-drop commanders typically aren't too popular unless they're incredibly powerful, and a lot of the times this is just going to read you draw 2 extra cards each turn, which is good, but isn't flashy enough to justify a higher price. I don't know, this card feels kind of mid in every format. It's only going for $9.99, so it's not going for anything crazy, but I do think there are cards that are better than this that cost less than it from this set. Really quickly, before we move on, I just want to say that this video is brought to you by you. Recently, I launched some channel memberships. If you guys want to help support me to make more awesome content, please don't feel pressured. You guys watching my videos already means the world to me. If you want to help me make some awesome content and get some cool perks like early access to videos like these, extended editions of shorts occasionally, or behind the scenes posts, consider becoming a channel member today. All right, let's get back to the list. Next up, number 6 is Vein Ripper. This is a 6 cost with triple black, so it is going to be a little rough to cast. 6/5 with flying and ward sacrifice a creature. It also says whenever a creature dies, target opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. So this is basically 2 Blood Artists stapled together on a 6/5 flying body with the ward sacrifice a creature. Blood Artist is a very good card. Now here you're paying 6 mana for 2 Blood Artists, which in theory should be 4 mana, but them stapled together and the big body and the ward makes this incredibly scary for your opponents, who are going to have to sacrifice a creature to even try and target this thing, and if they try to board wipe, they're probably board wiping your whole board and losing a ton of life to do it. This just seems like a card that'll be really great in aristocrat style strategies, which are really popular, and so it wouldn't shock me if this card sees a decent amount of play. It's currently going for $11.99 right now, and that feels about right, although I would expect it to temporarily dip and then probably rebound over time. Next up, number 5 is Kaya Spirit's Justice. This is a 4-cost white and black planeswalker that enters with 3 loyalty, and it says whenever one or more creatures you control and or creature cards in your graveyard are put into exile, you may choose a creature card from among them. Until end of turn, target token you control becomes a copy of it, except it has flying. Kaya also has a +2 that has you surveil 2, then exile a card from a graveyard. You can +1 to create a 1/1 white and black spirit creature token with flying, and you can -2 to exile target creature you control. For each other player, exile up to 1 target creature that player controls. This is a pretty powerful planeswalker. For just 4 mana, it has a ton of abilities. It can create a blocker for itself, you can get rid of threats out of graveyards, you can fill your own graveyard, and you can take creatures from your graveyard and exile them to kind of make temporary copies of them. This is just a lot of value, and it's the only planeswalker in the set, so it's currently going for $11.99. I don't know if it'll see play in any competitive formats, but it does seem like a fun card, and I really like the planeswalkers we've gotten since we've moved to 1 planeswalker per set. Next up, number 4 is Incinerator of the Guilty. It's a 6-cost 6/6 with flying and trample, and when it deals combat damage to a player, you may collect evidence X. When you do, Incinerator of the Guilty deals X damage to each creature and each planeswalker that player controls. So not only is this a 6/6 flying trampler for 6, but it also is an asymmetrical board wipe if you can connect. Now obviously you need cards in your graveyard in order to collect evidence X, but I think even if you just had a 2-drop, like a singular card in your graveyard that had mana value 2, this is still incredibly good, shutting down all the tokens. It's kind of a finisher to aggro decks if you can manage to get this out, but it's also great against other mid-range strategies. I think this has a lot of potential. Obviously in Commander it's a dragon, it's a big thing, it'll see play, but I think this even has potential in something like Standard is the top end of certain decks. Currently it's going for $14.99, and that feels just about right for a Mythic Red Dragon. Next up, number 3 is Massacre Girl Known Killer. This is a 4-cost black 4/4 with Menace, and it says creatures you control have Wither, meaning they deal damage to creatures in the form of -1/-1 counters. Then whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, if its toughness was less than 1, draw a card. On its face, this just says whenever one of your creatures kills another creature in combat, you get to draw a card, which is already really good, but it also means random 2/2s are really threatening to your opponent's creatures, making it really hard for them to attack even if you don't have great blocks. And if you're running any effects that kill with -X/-X, things like Toxic Deluge, this thing can draw you a ton of cards. On top of that, it's legendary, so this can be a commander running a lot of those style effects, including all of the enchantments like Deadweight. This just seems like a very fun card in a lot of formats, and it seems like it could be really good in a landscape where black and red is already really good, and so it's currently going for $15.99. Next up, number 2 is Delney Streetwise Lookout, a 3-cost white 2/2 legendary creature human scout that makes it so creatures you control with power 2 or less can't be blocked by creatures with power 3 or greater. The text people are really talking about though is if an ability of a creature you control with power 2 or less triggers, that ability triggers an additional time, basically doubling all of your triggers on all of your small creatures. While this can be a commander, I think this is going to see more play outside of commander or in the 99 of commander decks, doubling up things like Dockside Extortionist or any commanders that have power 2 or less. This is just generically good if you run a high quantity of this, and things like Death and Taxes and mono white go wide. On top of that, it makes things hard to block, so mono white aggro decks are also probably going to love this, making their tokens unblockable and probably making even more tokens, since a lot of decks like that run small things that make more small things that are triggered abilities. The card is honestly wild, and that's why it's going for $24.99 right now. I honestly don't know what to expect with this card. It could go a lot higher, it may go a lot lower. It really depends on how it feels in game and what decks really want to use this. Alright, finally number 1, the most expensive card from Murders at Karlov Manor. It's Anzrag the Quake-Mole. It's a 4-cost red and green 8/4 legendary creature mole god, and whenever it becomes blocked, you untap each creature you control, and after this combat phase, there's an additional combat phase. Then for 7 mana, it must be blocked each combat this turn if able. This thing is crazy in so many ways. First off, it's an 8/4 for 4 with a bunch of upside, but on top of that, it's legendary, so it can be your commander, but on top of that, it's really good in decks that have a lot of attack triggers, or just aggressive decks, or any decks that care about combat in any way. This can go in a lot of decks, doesn't cost a lot of mana, and it's incredibly powerful. If you cast something that gives it indestructible, you're going to be getting a ton of combats, especially if you activate that 7-cost ability, and if you fog, you can actually get infinite combat since your opponents will be forced to block it. Neither of them will deal any damage, and then you'll just keep getting combats, and if you have anything anything that says at the beginning of combat or anything like that, you'll get to do that infinitely as well. This seems incredibly good, incredibly pushed, and one of the best cards in the set, and because of that, it's also going for $24.99. It's really interesting to me that both Anzrag and Delney are both going for $24.99. Anzrag is for the big splashy play, it's the big creature you're going to win the game with, and Delney is all about getting incremental value, making small things unblockable, and doubling up small triggers. They're very much on opposite ends of the spectrum, but they're both incredibly good. Alrighty guys, those are the top 10 most expensive cards from Murders at Karlov Manor. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more content from me now, you can check out this video where I talk about exactly what's in a collector booster for Murders at Karlov Manor, or this video where I talk about every mechanic in the set, or this one that YouTube's just recommending to you. I'll see you guys in the next one, or at MagicCon Chicago if you're going to that. Bye.